This episode is brought to you by Merrill. Join one of the most iconic names in wealth management, Merrill. You'll be part of a dynamic team of advisors and specialists working hard every day to grow their clients' wealth. And with the support of best-in-class research, advanced digital tools, and the resources of a global institution, it's truly an opportunity you can be bullish about. Learn more at careers.bankofamerica.com. Copyright 2024, Bank of America Corporation.
This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps you find a fulfilling career. Every Wednesday, I talk to a different expert about the tools you need to get the work you want. You walk into the interview with high hopes, but as you talk, you feel it's not going well. And later, you learn someone else got the offer. What could you have done differently? Janine Esbrand is here to talk about how to show up as the ideal candidate in an interview. She's a career strategist, an executive coach, and the host of the Career Changemaker podcast. Janine joins us from the city of Surrey in the United Kingdom. Well, let's get started, Janine. Why don't many candidates stand out in a job interview? What happens?
Well, I will say that for a lot of people, when they are preparing for interviews, they are overly concerned with saying the right thing rather than positioning themselves and their expertise and their previous experience as the experience that the employer is looking for.
And what do people think is the right thing? What is it? What impressions do they have that they think are to make them stand out, but aren't actually doing that?
Yeah, I think people will think about common interview questions and then try and come up with what are the answers that would be good. So, like a classic example is if you're asked what are your weaknesses, and someone can say, well, my weakness is I'm a perfectionist, and try and make a weakness seem like a strength. I think sometimes people fall into kind of things that they've heard in the past or what they've Googled or what they think they should be saying rather than really looking at their experience and saying, what is it that this role requires? What are they wanting in a candidate? What impact are they looking to make? And how can I demonstrate that from what I have specifically done? I think people don't do that enough.
And why do candidates do these things? Janine, go back to these answers that aren't serving them well.
I think people aren't really thinking about the bigger picture when it comes to a role. So whenever there is an open vacancy, there's a specific reason why a company is hiring for that vacancy. There's a reason why they want to fill it, or they want to expand their company with this new role. And I think people aren't thinking about the commercials. They're just looking at the job spec at hand and saying, okay, they're looking for this candidate. Here's the things on the job spec. I need to try and speak to those things. If you have a bigger awareness of the reason why the role is required, it's easier for you to tailor your expertise and demonstrate how your expertise is going to help them to meet their bigger commercial goals. And I don't think enough people pay that attention.
What stops people from having that awareness? Why don't they have that mindset when walking into the interview room?
I think it's because when you are working in your role on a day-to-day basis, you are very much focused on the work that you do, the task that has been put before you, what your manager has asked you to do. And often people are in busy roles, in busy organizations. So they're kind of just wanting to get their heads down, do the job, and tick their tasks off the list. And so they're not in the habit of thinking about, where does this flow? Like, what is the point of me doing what it is that I'm doing? Why are they asking me for this? And because people aren't used to doing that in their day-to-day roles, they're not used to thinking about that when it comes to positioning themselves for their next opportunity.
Well, let's talk about how to show up as the ideal candidate in an interview and be memorable. So you've got 7 steps that you recommend applicants follow when going to a job interview, and I'd like to walk through each one. The first one on your list, Janine, is to come to the interview with examples of what you've done for past employers. How does this help you show up as the ideal candidate?
What people often will do is speak in generic terms about what it is that they do. So, they might say, I organized this event, or I managed this team, or I did fill in the blank, but they don't give specific examples. So what they end up doing is telling the employer what they can do rather than showing them what they can do. If you can bring a real world example, and an example that highlights the types of things that you would need to do in this role, you're showing the employer what you've actually been able to do in the past, including the results that you've been able to achieve. So it's easier for them to see that, oh, if we hire this person, they're going to come in and they're going to be able to hit the ground running with the types of tasks that we need them to be able to do.
What's the best way to find and prepare those examples before you walk into the interview room?
The key is to be looking at the job spec and looking at what is it that they're asking for this role, what are the requirements, and then take the time to reflect on examples of when you've done that in the past. It could be in this current role, it could be in previous roles. When have you done something similar? And even if you haven't done exactly the same thing, it's when have you gotten a similar result? And highlight those examples ahead of time.
Terrific. Number 2 on your list of ways to show up as the ideal candidate in a job interview is to understand why the job is open and how it fits into the organization and its needs. And you touched on this a moment ago. Tell us more about this. Why does this matter to an interviewer, Janine?
Yeah, because if you make it easy for the interviewer to see how you're going to add value from day one, you will position yourself as a candidate that's different from the rest. So if you understand why the role is open, so if it's the case that someone has just left and they left very quickly and they need to fill this role because the company is working towards a big target or launching a new product, they are going to be looking for someone who can hit the ground running. So if you know that, then you're able to make sure that when you're speaking about your experience, you're giving them examples of when you've been efficient and when you've used your initiative and when you've been impactful from the get-go. And your understanding of why the role is required means that you can speak to the fact that you're going to be able to come in and help them achieve their goals much easier.
How do you research this before the interview? What have you seen work with the clients that you help to understand why the role is open? What kind of research methods have helped?
Yeah, so it depends how the role comes about. So, say it's via a recruiter, you can ask the question, why is this vacancy open, or when did it come about? What's the reason it came about? You can speak to people who already work at the company and find out a bit about what their current strategic objectives are, what are some key things that have happened within the organization recently. You can also leverage LinkedIn and other social media platforms, mainly LinkedIn, to do your research about the company and pay attention to the updates. What updates have they been sharing about what the company is doing? So, if it's a company that's in a season of growth and they've just advertised that they have had an investment round, then you know that they are going to be growing their teams. And so this role may be open because they're expanding. So you've kind of got to do a bit of detective work with this, but it is possible for you to really be paying attention to what is the company doing that's probably leading them to hire right now.
Some candidates might only see a job posting online and they haven't had a conversation with a recruiter. They don't have any contacts inside the company. And they could do some online research, but would you also recommend that they try to speak to someone inside the organization, even if they don't have contacts there? And what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, even if you don't have contacts there already, you can still reach out to people. So LinkedIn is going to be your friend with this, and it makes it so easy for you to be able to look up a company, look up their employees. You can look up the different people that are in roles, perhaps in the team that you want to move into, or the department that you're targeting. And you can reach out to people and you can ask them for a few minutes of their time just to have a conversation about their experience working with the organization. With this, it's really a numbers game. There are some people who may not respond to you, but there are lots of people who are willing and open to have discussions. And so if you frame it so that it's, I just want 5 to 10 minutes of your time to have a conversation, you'll get people that will be willing to speak to you.
Terrific. Let's take a break, Janine. Stay with us. When we come back, Janine Esbrand will continue to share her advice on how to show up as the ideal candidate in an interview. Fast forward to the end of 2024 and think about your goals for this year. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If you want to learn a new language, you should get Babbel. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by more than 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. I'm using Babbel right now to get ready for a trip to Germany with my wife Chris to visit the Christmas markets there. Even if you don't have an upcoming trip of your own, you can still learn a new language. Here's a special limited time deal for our listeners. Get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/dreamjob. Rules and restrictions may apply. Have you ever gotten a text offering you a job that seemed too good to be true? I got one recently. The sender said she was a recruiter. She told me I could earn between $50 and $500 a day for only 60 to 90 minutes of work. And I could do this remotely from my home. It was a scam, of course. Scammers use messages like this to get your financial information and fleece you of your hard-earned money. How do scammers get your phone number or your email? Many use data brokers who publish information about you without your knowledge. But you can fight back. Incogni can help you reduce spam and prevent identity theft. Incogni reaches out to data brokers for you, requests removal of your personal data, and deals with any objections. Use promo code DREAMJOB to get an exclusive 60% off Incogni's annual subscription plan. Go to incogni.com/dreamjob. We're back in the Max List studio. I'm talking with Janine Esbrand. She's a career strategist, an executive coach, and the host of the Career Changemaker podcast. She joins us from the city of Surrey in the United Kingdom. Now, Janine, before the break, we were talking about how to show up as the ideal candidate in an interview, and you've got 7 recommendations for how to do this. We talked about the first 2 in the first segment. Let's talk about number 3 on your list for how to show up as the ideal candidate. And your suggestion here is to be clear about your career highlights. What do you mean by this, Janine?
What I mean by this is, what are the things that you've done in your career that really help you stand out? What are the things that you've done that are talking points? So often when I work with clients, when we're doing this type of work and trying to uncover what their experience is, people will always overlook interesting things to the point where I have to say, hold on, wait, you said what? You did what? With who? When? And those are the things that if they're making me stop and say, hold on, can you just rewind? That's the impact that it will have on an interviewer. And we're talking about showing up and being memorable. So being memorable is about highlighting the things that actually make you different, highlighting the things that not everybody else who's applying for this type of role will have. So you need to make sure that you're really thinking about what are some of my career highlights so that I make sure that I let them know what I want them to know about me by the time I leave the interview.
What's your best advice for how to pick the best career highlights, especially if you're mid or career or further along? You might have a long list. How do you narrow it down?
Yeah, I recommend narrowing it down to 3. And I would say, first of all, just brainstorm them all out. What are the things you're most proud of when it comes to your career? And then think about which of these would be most relevant or helpful or impactful for this particular role. Which of these would be the most impressive, and then pick that way. So you're really thinking about the role that you're applying for and then saying, if I was an interviewer, what would I want to know that would make me think, yes, we want to learn more about this candidate, and then pick those ones.
The 4th item on your list of 7 steps you can take to show up as an ideal candidate in an interview is to know how to speak the employer's language. How do you do this, Janine, and why does it help you in the interview room?
It helps because you want them to be thinking this person gets it. And when we're thinking about any organization, the goal of an organization is to make money, right? Even if it's not for profit, there's a goal. And so if you're thinking in terms of what is it that the organization is trying to do to increase revenue, to reduce risk, to make more impact? Those are their priorities, right? So if you're going into the interview and you're really speaking about results that you've gotten and how those results link to what is important to the employer, then they know that you're an employee that they're going to trust to come in and actually do work that's going to make an impact.
What's the best way to get clear about an employer's priorities before you go to the interview?
Well, depending on the size of the company, if it's a big company, you may be able to find out from their website. Have they got a recent presentation that they've done for investors? Have they got some updates in terms of what their strategic objectives are? You want to be focusing on what are they really working on right now. Their website's probably the first place to go with that. But then again, if you've had conversations with people, then in those conversations, asking specific questions about what is the company's priority right now? What are they focused on in this quarter, for this half year, for this year? And that's going to give you a clue as to where you want to be focusing when you're discussing your expertise and the results that you've been able to help other companies achieve.
Another way you say you can show up as the ideal candidate in an interview is to understand and address unspoken objections. How do you figure out what concerns an employer might have about you?
Well, often you kind of have them yourself. So if you're feeling a lack of confidence around going for a role because perhaps you feel like you don't hit all of the requirements, speak to it, right? So if you feel like there's something that's missing, rather than just hoping that they're not worried about that, you can mention like, I don't have specific experience in here. However, I do have experience with this, and this is going to help me to help you, right? And so I think instead of just ignoring things that they might be concerned about, talk about it.
And are there ways you should talk about the possible doubts that can both hurt or help you? In other words, should you try to be positive, or what have you seen work or backfire when candidates try to address unspoken objections?
Yeah, I think you want to be positive about it. I think if you can weave it in to how you're answering the question. So if they ask you for a particular type of experience and you don't have it, rather than saying, oh, I don't have an example of that, you can say, whilst I haven't specifically done that thing, I have done this, which is either similar or which demonstrates that I do have the ability to achieve a particular outcome. Then you're speaking to it, but you're not speaking to it in a way where you're just stopping at the point that you're lacking that particular skill set.
What should you do, Janine, if you leave the interview room and you ran out of time, or perhaps there was a doubt that was hinted at that you didn't address? Should you take action after the interview?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what can make candidates stand out is really what they do in the follow-up to an interview. So you can go away and you can always send a follow-up email to the interviewer and just say, had a great conversation today, just reflecting on particular question that was asked. There was one thing that I didn't manage to mention, and I just wanted to share that with you. And you can send that in an email, like a follow-up email that's coupled with a thank you for their time.
Your sixth recommendation for showing up as the ideal candidate is to research the interviewer in advance. What kind of research do you recommend?
I would say look the person up, understand who they are within the organization and where they sit. I really like using LinkedIn, the activity feature on LinkedIn. If you go onto somebody's profile and they are an active member of LinkedIn, you can go to the activity section and you can see what that person has been liking, what they have been posting, what they have been doing recently in their professional life that they've been sharing. And that can sometimes give you a real flavor for the person. It might tell you that they recently went to a conference or that they've recently won an award. And that's things that are good to know that you could potentially bring up in conversation to show that you've done your research.
Aside from referencing what you might have found online about someone, are there other ways you can apply that research in the interview room to stand out?
Yeah, I think if you're finding out things that the company has done recently, or maybe there's particular initiatives that have been run, you can frame your questions using what you found. So you can, if you're interested in extracurricular activities or charitable things that the company gets involved in, you can say, I noticed from my research that you got involved in this particular thing recently. Is this something that you typically do regularly? Is this something that someone in my position would be able to get involved in? So it's you really looking at ways that you can demonstrate that you've done your research. Framing it in a question is always a good way to go with that.
One more question about this. Sometimes you might be invited to an interview, but not told who you'll be talking with. What's the best way to find out the identities of your interviewers, or because there might be more than one?
Yeah, there could be. I think if you want to be proactive about it, you can ask. So whoever it is that you're liaising with, who's setting up the interview, you can ask the question, who will I be interviewed by? And I don't think there's any problem with asking that question. It shows that you are being proactive and you are really thinking about how you're going to position yourself in the interview. So I would recommend asking whoever you've been liaising with.
Your final tip for showing up as the ideal candidate in an interview is to make yourself memorable. How do you do this, Janine?
Show a bit of your personality. At the end of the day, once you're hired and you have to do the role, you're going to be working with people. And people like people, or they don't like people, right? And so, really think about the human element. When we are trying to remember someone, we often will relate that person to a particular fact that we know about them. So, why not share that? So I had a client not long ago who used to be a professional international hockey player. And she mentioned it on a coaching call. And I said to her, that is something that you want to make sure you're sharing. Because when they have all the candidates out and they're discussing the candidates, you want to be the one that they say, remember the girl who was the international hockey player? Like, you want something that makes you stand out. And it doesn't have to be work related. It could be something to do with your hobbies. It could be something to do with your interests. See how you can weave that into conversation so that they don't just forget you when they're thinking about all the different candidates that they've seen in a day.
Well, it's been a terrific conversation. Janine, now tell us what's next for you.
Yeah, for me, I'm involved in lots of projects at the moment, but one of the things I'm most excited about is my recent email series that I have started, and I've been sending regular emails out to my community that are action packed in terms of telling them what they need to be doing to make moves in their careers, and gives them strategic advice and tips and strategies that they can implement so that they can set themselves up to make the next best move in their careers. So that's really exciting at the moment.
Well, terrific. I know we'll include a link to that series in the show notes, and that listeners can learn more about it by going to careerchangemakers.com/prepare to pivot. And I know also that listeners can learn about your podcast by going to careerchangemakers.com/career-change.podcast, and that you invite listeners to connect with you on LinkedIn. Now, Janine, given all the great advice you've shared today, what's the one thing you want a listener to remember about how to show up as the ideal candidate in an interview?
Yeah, the one thing I want listeners to remember or to know is that before you can sell you to somebody else, you have to sell you to yourself. And so taking the time to really think about, what is the experience that I have? What is the expertise I already have? And how can I make it relevant to the person that's interviewing me so they can see that I'm going to add value? That's where you want to spend the most of your time when you're preparing. And that's what's going to really move the needle for you.
Next week, our guest will be Leah May. She's a career coach for high-achieving professionals. Leah helps you earn more money, get promoted, and manage job transitions. Looking for work takes time and energy. And along the way, there'll be highs and lows. Join us next Wednesday when Leah May and I talk about how to avoid job search fatigue. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job. This show is produced by Max List. Susan Thornton Huff schedules our guests and writes our newsletter. Lisa Kislenberry Anderson manages our social media. Our sound engineer and editor is Matt Fiorillo. Dawn Mole creates our transcripts, and our music is by Freddie Trujillo. This is Mac Pritchard. See you next week.